The Delphic Word. The Dedication by Angelos Sikelianos. Translated by Alma Reed. Part 1. The Dedication. Because I vowed the immense vow to raise my integral heart to its height as athlete, priest, and prophet, to crush within me ruthlessly the temptation of vanity, I did not turn my eyes to glance behind. For there, alas, where altitudes of solitary rocks have sheltered me, often like some treasure I hid my weariness. And like the ascetic who digs a well in the desert's waste to see both hell and heaven in its depth, caring not if time and flesh shall pass before his thirst is quenched from the very vein of the spring. Yet, sleeping a little in his great fatigue, fancies now the water issues that he so desires, and like a vigorous hermit, who all his life abstains to render manifest the miracle of his faith, but in carnal weakness, after much enduring, imagines he has reached the sacred confines when a single course is run, like the shepherd who from a distant watch slumbers above the precipice and stands with eyes closed, leaning on his crook, and suddenly, in the pervading darkness, thinks it is day and that he counts his flock. Thus often I have paused upon my road, believing that my years were endless, and my thought had built a fortress, that my soul had won an eternal lookout, and there, where I had sown, I would reap the Herculean crop. But, as in a flash of awareness, the ascetic knows the dream is illusion, and his whole body leaps to take in his hand again the heavy mattock and the spade, and like the grand hermit, the moon of the hermits, who, if he but lift his eyes, can direct his gaze straight to the gigantic vision, though, like a tremulous foam, spirits of keen desire surround him, for he holds the scourge, and even in this synapsis of incorporeal powers he drives afar the eagerness of undeveloped germs, and as the shepherd, mindful of his scattering flock, shakes off his drowsiness and whistles loud, while instantly each step is halted and the sheep await his coming, so, mid the swift encompassing lethargy, were opened within me as one the myriad eyes of Argus. And if indeed my weariness appeared as a hidden treasure, through this same weariness my will possessed itself, and like the magnet, augmenting in attraction as it draws, my soul learned more and more its dormant force. But as in its depths the mountain's strength was mingled indivisibly with all the sweetness of the fields, my heart, finding itself among the living and the dead, forgot its most cherished vow. Only the all, the things of today, tomorrow, eternity, like a vernal cloud bank, pity fomented within me more rapidly than the shepherd when he turns his sheep into the fold, and the lamb that all day bleated with hunger impatiently seeks its mother, while she also seeks, when, forestalling both, he flings it down at her feet, until around them at last arises no sound, save the suck of the little one that wags its tail. Thus I, in the flock of the dead and the living, would give to the mother who fled to Hades her baby, restore the son to the wretched father, and brother to brother, until from one point to the next my profound pity, embracing all, would instill a magic solace through the whole creation. But there came a day in which the dead and the living were like briars clinging to my clothes. Then, alone, and standing in my rags, I said to myself, "It is time that my skeleton also give light." Only my soul, before thou art done, make known and judge among the living and the dead who is and who is not. And as my staff was raised to separate the flock, suddenly its aspect seemed to change, assuming the splendor of a scepter, and like a javelin I felt it vibrate in my palm. For in that hour of wrath and loss I seemed to see in the distance the ascetic among the ascetics, the father of my land. To say if he were man or spirit, the word cannot formulate, but as the sword of the scabbard, he was nude of flesh. And I cried, O thou who wast awaited, arrest my impetus, for thou art the strongest compassion in my body. Thou art the great fatigue, the sacred valors. Thou art my mind's secret cornerstone. To the very end, my paths have been illumined by the dawn of beauty. But, Father, now that I might touch thy knees, since at length thou hast appeared, oh, stop and hear me. And as the plower and sower, the earth, cross-plow all of me. Cross-plow me to the bone, and probe me to the viscera. And he seemed to reply, Before thou wast born, I probe thee. He did not speak, nor did he move his lips, yet like a thunder his thought surged through my veins. Above my head his hand was passed, but if in blessing I did not know, for he bent me against the earth. And I said, Father, dost wish that I remain bowed, and while I live quench my thirst at thy feet as at a spring? For thou art upright, though my life were passed in bending, though all my breath expired before thine eyes, blowing over a little spark in thy mystic cavern to rekindle a great shipwrecked sun. Order me, Father, if I am to stay at thy feet, to shoot no further my heart's desire, to strip myself of the labor's glory. Behold me ready. Cut away the thought that flourished in me unhindered like a mane. And I said, Father, when I was destined to enter thy sacred road, forgive me if I strayed into the field of oblivion, and there, where man drags an idle purpose, I sometimes fancied it multiplied tasks around me. I prayed that thy vast stream might turn back there where my joy knew one perfect moment. Or if I prayed that in the perdition where walked thy people, thy mercy would extend a tireless hand of help. But now only that my sorrow and my silence in thy sacred rock might expiate my shame. And I thought he answered, Since thou art come to me, the light from many bones strewn along the way must have guided thee. It is not the passage of a single people, nor the grave of a few dead, the crucible where thou art entered. Here the silence immeasurable. Here the secret order. Here the very dew is heard as it falls from a cloud. Here the plexus of temples. Here the junction of nature. Here the great senses of earth concenter in one. Here the depth of anguish. Here endeavor's angle. Here the whole man trembles to hear the yes or the no. Here, when mutely encircling the resistless breath of deity, that fuses within him totally reason and organs, and lightening before him volition's high road, rears immortal the head upon his shoulders. Or, releasing it from the body, the leader thought impels it, as the waves the head of Orpheus, that sang alone, moving on toward the sea of incorruption, where all the soul is action. Never around this high and tranquil lookout revolves a concept vague or vain, but, like the eagles circling these heights, with broad wings spread eternally and governed by sublime rhythm, equally sublime and few and invincible are the reflections that there, where the will of man recoils, fearing the solitude and the heavy struggle, when trips the heart like a hammer in knees and hands and mind, cover the earth below with the great shadow of their wings, hearing and seeing all inseparably. If thou wouldst merge thy reason in infinite profundity, hither thou must come and sit at my feet. So proceeded his word through my brain, and meanwhile the eagles wheeled calmly above me. And lo, I was as one exhausted, who, caught by a sharp winter, finds a fire, and wholeheartedly seated before it, looks dumbly at the flame, and dumbly stretches his cold hands to where the glow is strongest, and when the heat in its ring has enclosed him, feels that at last his mind will be freed to think. As if at his voice an eternal warmth were mounting my members, my mind began to inundate with occult harmony, and I remained at his feet as one who, intensely remembering, over his own knees slumbers. Like the prophet who, blinded by cognizance of his great orgy, yet rejoices in his sacred obscurity, for the light of day no longer impairs his view of the stars, and his day is immense, and his night complete, and it is not a single sound that summons him, but the entire firmament flooding the vault of all hearing. No heed he gives to that which is near or to that which is far, for now the whole earth lies beneath his every step. Thus, at his feet, closely huddled, I, the living, was motionless, and I, the dead, lived. Part 2. But, as in sleep, the mystic leaven of the dream now fixes the terrible memory before us, again, gravely turning the pages of our soul, the great and stuporless Sibyl places it on the tripod. So, in the immortal silence where I took my place, each remembrance was an oracle and another birth. And like the needle enclosed in the mariner's compass, ever a-tremble, yet no wind or wave makes it move. But whether it sail in tempest or calm, vibrating with the same desire that immeasurably is one, as if mute care had enclosed my body, my impulse, in slavery, soared over all the earth, though my head were bowed to the soil like that of the ox not yet unloosed from the yoke. If my companions were the centuries or the moment, I was unaware, for my heart bore the weight of iron. And in the great immersion where I digested my fatigue, it seemed as if the Chthonian serpent, filling the space around me, slowly uncoiled, and that all the earth, like a fruit displaying its seeds, was opened before me. And as the dough of the bread bulges over the mass, the graves showed me all their dead. The cavern revealed the ascetic entire, its nude royalty the sarcophagus disclosed. If an instant or centuries had passed, I could not tell, when my eyes were finally opened, but, glancing about me in the distance, and on high, no longer at his lookout did I see the father of my land, but at his post I saw that I was alone, and that above me was all the ascent and all the rock. And a burden immovable oppressed my breast, until my grief found an outlet in my sigh. Ah, the toil of so many years to preserve my powerful body like a column, so that I may stay the adversary of the century. To make fast for me, as a god's, the holy nakedness of the mind, at the point where my tendons of steel have carried me, where the sun appears to be alone, and alone the moon, having around me like a lion the potence of the mountains. And the road still long, and I unable to look behind, and the summit far for flight. But to pull up the slope like a bull that strains all his nerves, as he works a hard flank of the mountain, while the slope resists him, like the ox staggering where his foot has sunk in the very ground that he has ploughed, the veins to branch heavily in the hand that presses against my knee, my heart to groan only, climb. Ah, not to have one companion, not even to be alone, but awake to be alone, and in my sleep with all humanity. By day, in sun or rain, to labor incessantly, and at night to struggle with God in the darkness. And if at last I stretch out my limbs in exhaustion, thinking that I shall have the warmth of the heavens above me, and if mine is the illusion that my evening arrives with relief, to feel the shooting stars tearing my heart like arrows. Ah, not to be alone, and not to have companions. And as I do not retreat, but ever climb the rock, and as the pride of effort erects me in purity, to feel the orphanhood of the solitude pouring over my spine. For below me, like the smoke of a spent fire, rolls the enslaved echo of vain trumpet blasts, and the cry of the peoples follows me to the heights, like the dog that leaps upon the beggar's back. Help me, earth, for deep within me the first order has stirred. The action of the world is smoke. My thought is action. Help me, earth. In my weariness I wring out thy weariness. If I have bended like Antaios, like him I touch thee. Help me, earth, and thou, sky. Untie the mighty knot, so that above the earth sail the ark of the Aristoi. Part 3. So much I sighed profoundly, that my sigh became the very staff and prop of my heart, and I said, What matters it if thou art alone? Now that the summit is far, what else remains for thee than to climb? And why, therefore, seekest companions, since for thee there is still the ascent, and not the return? And as the night gradually enveloped me, I raised my eyes to the night, and said, O God, is not yet come the great Compline of my flesh? Has the sloth of the world not yet been crushed from my limbs? Am I not perchance ready for thy great sign, to give all my blood as a cloud gives lightning? And it seemed that a voice much deeper than my blood, and deeper than its very pulsation, answered, A great love thou hast taught, but if in thee it be true, go on until above opens of itself the vein of thy mind. Know that I do not expect a vain libation, but when thou hast climbed the sacred predestined steps, and the lightning flashes of thy brain have cleared the way, that even thy body may pursue the intoxication of my occult Olympus, there in the secret place of the dance, where I am wholly immersed, the genetic fury of thy mind will reveal itself completely. I do not wish a vain libation. What if nothing remain upon the earth but one indomitable thought, and that one struck by lightning? Look well at the abyss, that thy thought grow mighty, for the mind can plant even the abyss. Thus, it seemed to me, I heard a voice deeper than the voice of my blood, deeper than its very pulsation. Then, like a body inflamed in the battle and no longer mindful if death be confronting it, suddenly, with unexpected fever, as if all that went before were the covering of a serpent, I began anew the ascent. And I said, Oh, that I never more may pause, since from now onward I inhale an immortal fragrance in the air. Grant only that the hidden source of the spring may be free, there where thou thyself dost breathe. For here, from hour to hour, my aim is dashed to pieces and destroyed in oblivion, like a shooting star in the darkness of night. Grant that I may be weighed in the mystic balance, where a full mind outweighs a star entire. And again the deep voice answered, Not even haste can give thee the pure delight of which thou art worthy. But here, where the gifts of the night are fully perceived, yield thyself slowly now to an unfrequented mystery, and by the great desire walk thou slowly and firmly, since for others also thy way may become a road and a path, as with him who, combing the mane of his horse, harmonizes in his fancy, like a rhythm, the journey he is about to make. I am asking that thy advance be solid and measured, if above thou wouldst truly unite with me. Thus it spoke, and now, knowing well what I wished, like Orpheus, who, gazing at the heavens, held in the palm of his sacred hand a fistful of earth, I, bound by integral rhythm, resumed my changed pace. At last, each step a purpose, each glance a purpose, my every thought a purpose that fraternized my blood. And I said, I must not hasten, I must not delay, for the ascent conceals the summit from me like a bride. As a groom to a bride adorned, who awaits with immortal serenity, I must proceed serenely. Thus I spoke, and thus I reached my secret joy. Thus, O my summit, I have touched thy untouchable veil. All was mute. Around me was infinite tranquillity. Mute the reason, the mystic hierogamy, mute. And behold, the voiceless and ceaseless thought descended, like snow, in swift density around me. Around me descended not joy, but its soul, and as the waves of the ocean it extended alone, and it rose and fell, and again surrounded me, like a sea that finds no coast upon which to break. And gradually I felt an immense gust changing me, as a great tree is entirely changed by the heat, and as the almond instantaneously opens all its blossoms, my mind blossomed forth its living vow. And only then, when I knew the pure intoxication around me had flowered a tangible Olympus, and when all was resplendent within and about in that infinite silence, a trumpet, perhaps, or was it a lyre, like a nightingale in the night, like a cicada in the heat, in one voice resounded with the all, Nike, victory. And the veil of the summit dropped before it, and by a cry all my blood was held as by a hematite. Joy be unto the secret love that ever said to thee, Climb, until on high opens of itself the vein of thy mind, and that in the secret place of the dance, where now thou art wholly immersed, again thy spirit feels its genetic fury, that here the will is soul, and memory an ocean, and muse, the mother of muses, a science immortal, and here the word is command and inundation of power, so that within it thou mayest immerge the lyre of thy nerves. And when each of thy veins is filled with the commandment, and thou art replete with the immortal hymn, then tarry not, but descend. Part 4. Such was the word that was present in me, and as if I were a mystic warder of the stars, longing to participate, soul and body, in the divine dance, Intrepidly I merged myself in the rhythm, and as if I were nearing the terrible image of the worlds, my brain sustained an immense sensation. Like a lyre, the rhythm vibrated my nerves, and my heart, like a mythical and sleepless nightingale. But night and day I mastered the throbs of the orgy, though I ate from the timbrel and drank from the cymbal, though I tasted the bread given me by the stars, and the wine poured me by the crater of the suns, because before me the soul was will, memory, a vast inundation, and muse, the mother of muses, a science immortal. And I, before its great glance that wholly encompassed me, weighed myself circumspectly, as before Artemis or Thea. By the sacred scourge of a discipline, in his own blood, the Spartan Ephebus was bathed. Firm, it held me in its mystic arena, which, as I contemplate, revives and keeps me erect, and around my throbbing it described a fortress, so that I might know my heart as a star among the stars. Secretly my thought, resolute, in purpose it rooted, until that thought felt like the laurel at the season of fruit. How long it filled my veins with divine rhythm before my heart of its own accord said, "Descend." How long before itself it held me sleepless, while in me the mighty word was present, I cannot measure. But as I was moved, it seemed that with me the whole earth was moved by a new vow. For I felt the light of my mind being equally shared by the living, the dead, and the forgotten, and behind me all the heredity of the earth following the lyre of my nerves in litany. For at last I realized that my step, my glance, my breast, even if from solitude I walked toward the crowd, bore me solely upon sacred currents, as to the wind the eagles abandon their wings, that do not strike, but quiver. And my mind that was nurtured by silence and by rhythm, and my huge breath and my cyclopean glance, discerned around them new-born spaces, hidden at first, but now amply revealed. And I, breast and mind, breathed pure immortality, each angle more expansive than sacred Asia, each moment longer than centuries, each breath without hindrance, united with the stars. Thus, as my eyes swept the space in the distance, what shadows gradually lengthened toward me? Below, I saw the rock that I had left, flowering at my glance like a diamond newly cut. And I cried to it tenderly, "Hail to thee! Joy be unto thee, that today thy confines shine beyond the stars." But I fastened my gaze on the side of the rock, as the eagle after prey dilates all the pupil of its eye. For it seemed that some human forms were on the road, and were dispersed either pausing or climbing. And, as if all had strayed and were weary, their sacks weighed heavily over their shoulders. Like a man who goes to bring help, I quickened my pace, feeling a secret throbbing in my breast. And as I drew nearer, I again fixed my gaze, and it seemed to me there were some not ignorant of struggle. Who they were I do not know, but all, erect or stooping, appeared to await something mutely. And all, having mounted by some surge of time, were scattered even when they moved together, and were like all those who take the road, impelled by the blood to enjoy once in broad vision all that the world's short-sightedness separates, and all that thought has the right and glory to unite. But, because of the hard ascent and their great haste, each thinks the summit is the place where he tires. Then my heart beat more strongly, as if in its depth it was asked with bitterness mixed with joy, Perchance there are those thou hadst expected as companions, those thou hadst hoped to find at thy luminous return. As I formed the question and voiced it in my depths, I balanced my heart in my breast like a stone. And I said, Advance, for time judges each of thy steps. Advance, that the word of force may become a bitter goad, and thy love retain the scourge. But let not the time that was given thee escape. For the hour of sowing is an impulse, and an impulse is the summer. Scatter the seeds, and time will bear to thee the harvest. Thus I spoke. My entrails were not disturbed, but my soul, reanimated by Bacchia, leaped like flame. Then, with neck solidly bearing the burden of the commandment, I advanced among them boldly. And hearing my step and beholding me above, they imagined that I was a shepherd of the mountain. But there I paused, and my seat was the rock, and like an ancient master I regarded them as from a circle. In your midst I place this great statue of effort, and by it I revive your bodies and your minds. Shame, I cried to them, shame! Arise, shake off your fear, and, coming together, look one another in the eyes. Shame, I cried to them, shame to the youth that remains in you, to feel the weight of the bread, as if it were poison. Quickly extend the hand to renew your courage, since together you started out, reunite also here on high. Thus at first I cried, and they, seeing me above, still believed me to be a shepherd of the mountain. Arise, and cleanse your thought of confining sleep, I cried to them, and hear my voice. For at last the word leaps in my spirit like the ram surrounded by the spring and the tall grass. You imagine perhaps that my ears are accustomed to this harsh echo that now you hear, and that my daring is a mountain force? It is the mystic force that traverses the centuries, and like Samson I grasp the columns of time. Another table I have prepared for you. Ah, how long, if you but knew, have I awaited you? Then all opened wide their eyes on my visage, as if they would vaguely divine my mind and my purpose, and turning my spirit like a Bacchic amphora, towards the divine pontifex of future things, the sun, in such a manner I spoke to them that their speech was taken away, and they opened to me their arms. And they listened with all their hearing, as one by one I told the things of today, the future, and those forgotten for centuries. And as bountifully the gift descended upon them, each soul, having heard, became virgin, and their glances, hands, and heads were changed, and they seemed to be ready either for dance or struggle. And I said, If indeed you are ready to dance or to struggle, go forth, singing the songs of the springtide of all the earth. Bodies initiate, dance around the new joy, for even your hazard destiny now casts aside. And all, with hearts impatient and full of sacred audacity, strike the earth, as the pure-blooded stallion before starting. That at last the days are ripe, and time that eternizes all dissolves like snow the silence of the centuries. That the currents of the centuries descend from the sides of every summit to the sacred base of the primordial world. That the ruins and flowers unite. That from the depths cries the spirit of the earth, and the stone sighs like a heart. But, before moving together, encircle me, and all, joining hands, swear the great oath, to hear first the rhythm that I carry from the height, and with which, at last, I plough, and with which I sow. And by the same I hold you before our departing, for the harvest of all the earth, for the vintage of all the earth. I spoke, and they were sworn, and their spirits were united by the struggle, when to the earth with a new pledge they were bound. And together all beat their heels against the ground, and thus commencing the dance they opened their lips. The deliverer of the earth is rhythm, his companion is rhythm, and his light is rhythm, profound, sublime, and mystic. We had no leader swan for our mythical voyage, for which at last we believed there was no passage. But behold, the soul of swans that for centuries awaited, now released from lethargy, flaps anew its wings. And in all this I was a part, and breathed not a breath. But a mute emotion touched my viscera, for it seemed, as I raised my eyes, that mystically I saw again, in the distance, the father of my land. To say if he were man or spirit, the word cannot formulate, but of flesh he was nude as the sword of the scabbard. Like snow, an indescribable purity was upon him, and his age was as if, upon the earth, there had never been youth. And in his brain, simultaneously, as if it were his kiss upon my brow, I perceived his last commandment. Son of my own soul, conserve thy force, that for others also it may become a road and a path. Behold the soul of swans that for centuries awaited, now aroused from lethargy, more lightly flaps its wings. And before it lifts them completely, and towards the clear music, toward the action eternal directs them, thou, from the great breasts of thy wisdom, from which thou mayest bestow the milk of the earth, like serene cataracts, give them abundantly to drink, as if it were my soul, and drop by drop the secret doctrine that from me thou hast taken. Thus he spoke to me, and at last, when I saw that he made me the sign, and that slowly the measure of the dance began to retard, again, just there, I held them. Again, the rock was my seat. Again, like an ancient master, I regarded them as from a circle. There I paused. There I recovered the sacred valors. And here I place the cornerstone of liberation.